It's a great day to be optimistic. Welcome to the Doomer Optimism podcast. Today with us, we have Julie Fredrickson, tech entrepreneur, angel investor, and advisor to other similarly inclined startups. We also have Chris Dancy. He's been called the world's most connected man. This is an individual who has been quantified and has quantified more intimate details of his life, probably than anybody else around, in order to maximize health, well-being, and overall success. So again, welcome to Doomer Optimism podcast. This is a podcast where we avoid phrases like, so, right, one thing, and we speak clearly. So unless we fail to do that, let's get ready to mumble. So let's get ready to mumble. Welcome, Julie. Welcome, Chris. I'll step aside, take care of Lucia, and welcome in Dr. Ashley Colby, my wife. Have a good talk.
Okay, here I am. So let's get started, Julie, by why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, what you're known for, what is your career, and maybe walk us through a little bit, what is attractive to you about this orientation, Doomer Optimism?
Well, my background is very much a Silicon Valley family. The apocryphal story that my father tells is we moved to the West to pursue the computing revolution, and he was working on a pitch deck the day I was born in Fremont, which is the poor side of town. And we climbed our way up through the Silicon Valley pantheon through there. And, we're not particularly, we're no Bezos or, Elon Musk types, but we have managed as now the second generation of just being really optimistic about what technology can do for your life. So I have had 3 startups, 2 of which were successful and actually sold. One of them was when I was much younger. It was an ad tech. The second one was actually a cosmetics company. We did direct-to-consumer cosmetics, which I'm mostly wearing right now, even though there has been no reason to wear the makeup for the last 18 months. So a lot of my experience comes from just trying shit out, even if I don't really know if it's going to go anywhere. And then occasionally they turn into businesses, and that's pretty rad. And then occasionally they crash and burn and we go bankrupt, and they're like, well, okay, the worst happened. It wasn't so bad, actually. Which probably orients my doomer thinking quite a bit, because I have absolutely had the worst case scenario occur multiple times for me, and I have always been able to come out better, happier on the other side of it. My family had a bankruptcy in Web 1. 2 years ago, I had some very serious health problems. I have a condition called ankylosing spondylitis, and got to the other side of that too. And that just blows my mind. So Chris, when you say your quantified self, I have now become one of those people that's like leaning into, I can make every aspect of my life better if I just keep a little bit more track of it and let that ambiently happen and slowly mold my behavior. And then I actually have a stack of books that I might pull up later of how and when I turned to proper dooming and prepping. But we can kind of cut from there, and you can ask some questions if that was an okay introduction. Because
yes, that was great. And Chris, I'm just wondering if you might talk a little bit about, do you think that there's a connection between people who are involved in tech and, I don't know, I guess resilience or the ability to withstand major catastrophes over time? I don't know if that's been your experience at all.
It definitely seems to be an alignment between what I would call systems thinking and, hyper planning. I think where some of the tech, maybe Silicon Valley, feels sometimes cringy is why they wait to actually consider that planning affecting other people until they got theirs. Like, what is it about somehow becoming slightly successful where other people now matter? That part always made me uncomfortable.
Yeah, totally. So I guess, Julie, walk us through what what precipitated the doomerism, which part of the crises that we're facing. I guess everybody sort of has their flavor of the thing that most upsets them or has impacted them or gave them a sort of aha moment, like, oh, we're in a situation. So walk us through that journey. And then I'd also like to hear that from Chris.
Yeah, my oh shit moment came during Hurricane Sandy in New York. I lived downtown in one of the flood zones, and we lost power for 10 days. And I had prepared a little bit. Like, it wasn't as if Hurricane Sandy wasn't something that we knew was coming in. But other than buying water and food and having a flashlight, I was utterly unprepared for all of the other aspects of, well, I don't have any power and the power is not coming on for days. How do I reach people? What do I do? In Manhattan, everything below about 33rd Street was in the dark for 10 straight days. And it was actually a much better experience in hindsight that I would have anticipated. There was no looting, there was nothing crazy. Everyone just really wanted to help each other out. But the lack of basic preparedness just really struck me. So I lived next to one of the projects, Confucius Towers, and they are, the project towers in New York are all, multi-story, and the elevators were out for 10 days. So the only way to get to all of the folks who were living at the top of the tower, elderly folks, was just, you had to lug up big jugs of water. So I spent all of this time just trying to get stuff upstairs and realizing, oh my God, no one had any conception that it could be like this. But a city like Manhattan could just be done. So I think that's probably where I got it. My husband also has a similar Hurricane Sandy story where he had to bail out water in a generator and server room. And that was just one of the sort of things that we shared. We weren't married at the time, but we both had okay, we don't want to experience that again. None of that was positive. And that wasn't like full on dooming, but it was definitely being prepared has advantages.
Right. And just like, I guess, seeing the fragility of the systems as they're set up, you're just like, so nobody had a contingency plan for the situation,
just so crazy.
Failure of planners, who you like think you're reliant upon,
So there was this flash of phosphorescent light around, it was sort of later in the evening when the storm had first started to hit. And it was just like something out of like a science fiction movie where you're like, oh my God, like, is this an eldritch horror? Is it aliens? What's happening? And then everything went dark. And it turns out that was a transformer on 14th Street blowing, and the entire lower half of the city was gone. And it was just such a scary thing because I had no idea what it was. Like, at that point, did not pay attention to what does it look like when a transformer blows.
Right. So, and just at such a scary moment, like you don't even, a lot of the infrastructure you don't even think about. Yeah. Like you don't even think, it just works, and you just show up and you turn on the lights, and then it should just work. So it becomes that moment where you're like, what is backgrounded becomes foregrounded. Like, oh wow, all this infrastructure is just something I should know about at least, and how do we get energy and how do we get water and all this kind of stuff. So Chris, what about you?
I think mine was probably super emotionally based. My mother was born in the early 40s, and she lost both her parents, one to suicide and one to cancer, when she was 11. And then, don't ask me how this happened other than small town America. No one checked to see if she was okay. So she ended up living alone for almost 2 years. And like in a small town where people didn't notice, well, is there anyone actually caring for the kid whose parents are both dead now? So when I was being raised, my mother always kind of instilled in me, just you do it yourself. She was hyper planning, list making, I mean, on another level, and to the point where I really couldn't really understand it. I think the next big shift, there's 3 shifts that kind of got me here. The next one was in the late 80s, early 90s, I lost a lot of my friends to HIV/AIDS. So watching kind of no planning, no resiliency, Fauci again, just decimate my community. And it's hard for people who are in their 50s because, you know, we lost like literally a generation of people. Most people, you know someone who lost someone during that time. That really taught me a lot. That was the first time I actually organized. So we actually went out and went into people's homes. And while we didn't have computers and systems, you know, we did, but not like we do now where it's all connected. It really helped. And I think the next one kind of for me, the next big kind of awakening was just slowly this decade, I watched people kind of their autonomy erode when it comes to how they consider technology and each other. Yes, things are convenient, but that doesn't mean they're good. And for me, like being able to build things this decade for communities, like my neighborhood has a system I built. Actually, you know, I helped, you know, I put something together for you guys real quick. It has been like liberating. Well, I can't get out and chop down trees and do the stuff I know that I see so many doomers do. I would love to, you know, I do what I can. So I'm just inspired by other people's stories, but at its core, it started out emotional for me. It wasn't something that was an event.
Yeah, and you know what? I think there's really something to that, like the at the base level, just struggling with something in some way, as long as it's doesn't get to the point of trauma, which then can sort of like lock somebody in depression or anxiety or whatever. But some set of struggles and coming out of the set of struggles on the other side can really build resilience in such a positive way. And I think it's just sort of underestimated. Not that I think in general we live in a culture where just avoid anything bad at all costs or anything difficult at all costs.
Well, Julie mentioned bankruptcy. You know, people don't talk about the very real psychological effects of bankruptcy. My parents lost their home, you know, when I was a child. We lived in our car and we had to lie about it, you know, and this is back before they could do checks to see if you went bankrupt and if you're applying for jobs and things. So again, I think there are so many ways to become a doomer optimist. Unfortunately, all routes usually lead through some pain.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
The leading through the pain, I think, actually is crucial because the pain gives you some amount of information on how will you react if something does not go well. And for me, when my family went bankrupt, we went bankrupt in the sort of Web 1 crash, when it feels a little bit like this current moment, except this current moment we haven't crashed, where my father made all kinds of assumptions about what the future was going to look like through a totally optimistic lens, but we had no doomer plan. And then when just markets collapsed, and you know, this was 2001, so this was the 9/11 crashes, like that was it. It's like, okay, now you are going to have to go into the world and you have nothing. Like, oh, okay, well, shit.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it did build a lot of skills. I think to your point about resilience is that finding that you can handle things that seem awful and turn them into, well, maybe it's more of an inconvenience, or maybe this is actually a gift and I can do something with it.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I would substitute can handle with can survive. Because I don't know if I ever handled any of them well. I'm not going to lie and say I was some pillar of strength. Every single time something's happened to me, I'm a mess and I'm angry and I'm violent, and it's not good.
But you get through it. You get through somehow. Yeah, and I think that if I think back to one of my more difficult moments when we first moved to Uruguay, we had moved into our house, but we're waiting for the power company to connect the electricity which runs the well pump. So we were without water or power and with two little kids for several weeks. I think it was 6 weeks. And we're basically just camping with kids. And I'm not like happy about it. I'm not like thriving in this situation. I'm just getting by. The kids are eating and sleeping and like being taken care of and bathed. And basically that's it. Like we're just getting through the situation. And then you come out on the other side, like with a set of skills and you then maybe look back and think about how you acted in that situation. And then that gives you a set of tools to then use in the next time it comes, it's less difficult. So now when our power goes out, I'm just like, okay, whatever. I'm not that affected by it because I spent a long time in that situation. So it gave me like a set of tools to think like, this isn't that bad. I've done this before. I know what to do kind of thing.
Can I mention something about it might be kind of off color, but one of the things that I've also noticed is people who exit some type of situation like the one Julie has described and Ashley and I, there's something that really makes me uncomfortable. And I just want to say this out loud in front of people who are in the community. There's a large number of these people who will then monetize their pain. And I really think we need to start addressing, like, do you come out of these situations where you develop a resiliency, where you then extend what you've learned to others, or do you milk it? And I know it's kind of emotional and ugly, and I don't want to say it, but sometimes I really find it awkward to see people who become successful post-calamity and then market that. It just seems not true. Yeah, that's about okay. I didn't know if we were allowed to go there with kind of the ugly talk. Okay.
Yeah,
this is not a family-friendly podcast, so like you can swear, we can have real conversations here.
Yeah, I feel it. I feel that like in my bones, Chris. Partially because I think everyone is prone to doing a little bit of the inspiration porn. Look at me surviving. Partially because you are proud for having done it. And part of it is that there is such an appetite for seeing struggle that seems overcomable, even if what is and is not overcomable is entirely personal. Like one person's tragedy is another person's Tuesday. And the appetite for it, I think, is pretty strong. And I don't always love that. I spent some time in disability communities because of my spine, and the amount of inspiration porn that goes on with you're disabled, but you can do anything. Like, yeah, I mean, you have to. It wasn't an option.
Right. Yeah, I think that's actually a really good point. There's a really fine line between, I don't know, sort of when extreme situations happen to people, there can be a lot of very extreme outcomes as a result of that. People go to extreme places. And the thing that worries me is I always say, like, there's just so many neo-cults. Like, people just want to be saved and they want to be taken up by some strong leader and when there's trauma or crisis. And I think, like, just navigating that line between people who want to just go straight toward save me, oh leader, and I'll do anything you say, like, let's just start from scratch, this whole society is fucked, and so, you know, whatever. And that's a really scary impulse to me, and I think something we really need to be aware of. And but then at the same time, I don't want to be like, oh, so a lot of people who go in that direction are people who tend toward community level solutions. And they're like, I don't want to be an individualist. Like, I want to do this within community, which is a great impulse too. But it's just like it's just a really nuanced road one must take, I think, in managing crisis and trauma. And it's got to be some mix of like personal strength and personal, you know, wherewithal and self-sufficiency in combination with other people who are also personally strong, who have something to share.
Well, because I'm an investor, I see a lot of, and I'm very transparent that I am in fact a doomer and would like to see companies that help with resilience and preparedness. I have seen a lot of companies that I think are fundamentally predatory because they do go to that area of, I just want the mentality of, I want to be saved. Can I just buy this product and be prepared? And I personally find it unethical. And I've gotten into fights with other investors who are like, it's a great business. Look, it's yeah, I will just say the company. It's a company called Judy. It's very well funded and it sells like $100, $250 like 3-day emergency packs. And the reason it upsets me is that it is quadruple the price of what the actual items would be if you just went to Army Navy surplus or went on Amazon or to your local hardware store. And they package it all up in this very shiny veneer of like, you buy this thing, you're prepared for anything. And I just think that is so dangerous to give people the hope and the information that you're going to be fine. It doesn't take anything but buying things. It is not about making purchases. It is about your mindset and being prepared to handle things and learning skills. It's not like you don't want to have some of those products. You should have a flashlight. You should have water, but you are not being saved by a nice red bag of direct to consumer expensive products.
Yeah, I think there's some interesting things that y'all are bringing up here. I'm trying to think about like like sort of the fundamental issue, like, because I think all four of us find this sort of like inspiration porn to be cringy at best and downright unethical at worst. I think part of the root of that is that it's sort of shilling for the system. Like it's part of that whole pick yourself up by your bootstraps mentality of like, look, no matter how bad your life is, you can make something of yourself. But the problem is that they're not really making something of themselves. They're simply capitalizing on the way the system abused them. And I think that the other off-ramp for that energy is, this sucked for me, I'm going to change the system. I'm going to actually change the system and make it so that no one ever has to experience this again, right? And so, I find it interesting. I think like the pursuit of happiness, right, is a great example of that. Is that it was like, look at how terrible my experience getting to the top of the mountain was. And that now I'm going to show how you can get to the top of the mountain of this system, when really it was the system that was abusing him in the first place. He should have actually told the system to fuck off and change it, right? Instead, he just became another shill for the system. And I think it's a way of saying like, it's your fault you're poor. It's your fault you're disabled. It's your fault that there's no sidewalks in your city for your wheelchair. Like, it's your fault that you can't survive in the system. And I think that this inspiration porn is just a escape valve for the increasing buildup of tension in the system.
And it's also everywhere. I mean, you could take any of the big YouTubers or any of the big influencers. They take some tragedy and then turn it into a platform, which again, all four, I literally have a book like about my life. Okay, but the challenge then is they then become successful at selling an easier version of their story. It's like so many people like will take my classes now, or, follow my Patreon. And I just think you're basically taking what attention you have and wasting it on giving people a shortcut through what you experience. And that's not going to work. And, just from HIV and AIDS, like, we were successful in a lot of that, not because of our community, but because of our organization and our activism. And we never lost sight of the mutuality of defending each other. But there's this porn that happens when things commodify in communities and they become, as Julie said, I'll buy the solution and will it save me? And it's so dangerous. And I just wish people could follow their attention, literally their attention, and see what they're attracted to. And if they're attracted to things that other people are attracted to, there's probably a big problem there.
Yeah, I think the thing is, what is so damaging about it is that it's taking some of the most revolutionary aspects. Like, the system is creating radicals, because the system is, what I found interesting about both your story, Chris, and your story, Julie, is that both of your radicalizing moments were around literally the center of the capitalist system, which is New York City. Manhattan is the center of the capitalist system. Could not handle edge cases, right? In one case, it was HIV/AIDS in a group that was edged out at the time, right? And it couldn't handle this edge case. During Hurricane Sandy, it couldn't handle an edge case. During COVID, it couldn't handle an edge case, right? It consistently, the actual urban makeup, the demographic, the societal makeup of the literal center of our universe, right, could not handle edge cases, which is the definition of collapse nearing, right, from a world's historical systems approach, right, is that it collapses at the edges and then comes to the center. And in the last 30 years, we have seen the center literally unable to handle edge cases over and over and over again. None of us have even mentioned the 2008 financial collapse, which literally started in New York City, and New York City could not handle this edge case because the whole system is designed for just in time, and we're just going to make it, we only are caring about the next 24 hours. And if we can't make it, suddenly everything just falls apart, right? Which is what happens, like, if you look at like a physical representation of like a complex matrix, right? Is that it looks fine, it looks fine, it looks fine, and then the right domino collapses, and then it's just like, the whole thing goes down because it has all these knock-on effects and it gains its own a momentum of its own, and it becomes impossible to stop it. All you can really do is to redirect all that inertia, all that momentum onto a different track, right?
Mhm.
And what I feel like what we're doing as a group, the Doomer Optimists, if you will, as a group, is trying to develop a new track so that when the train has to get off, it can take that momentum into a new track, right? Versus just falling off the cliff, which is what our current system has no plan. It's just like, we're just going to keep going and just magically hope more track appears. And we're all saying, no, we know there is no track. We can clearly see there's no track in the future. So let's build a new one. So at least we can turn that momentum. And, you know, sadly, if we don't build enough of that track, some of these cars are just going to tip over in the transition, right? And I think, like, I also wanted to mention something you said, Julie, about the startup or the company you mentioned, is that I look at them almost like, and I hate to put it in these terms because mushrooms and fungi actually are incredibly important to the natural world. But I think what we're seeing is the vast majority of new companies are essentially mushrooms. They are simply here to decompose the rotting corpse of the system. And so, you know, they're selling, and they can tell themselves that they're doing good, right? They can say, like, look, we are preparing people for the worst, right? We're giving them a path to preparation for the worst. But in actuality, all of our attention should be put towards avoiding the worst so that these systems are not even required, right? That you don't have to prepare for these situations. A resilient system with redundancies and local capacity would not need go bags, right? You wouldn't need, you know, 50 acres in Nevada. Like, you wouldn't need any of that because the system is there to take care of you, right? And even if the system is just literally an informal series of connections in your local community, but like, there's no reason for anyone to starve at all, right? In America at all, because there is enough money, but the system is designed so that we're going to give it, you know, it's going to accumulate in certain pockets and we're just going to have sacrifice zones. But I think, like, it's almost like beyond like disaster capitalism. And now it's almost like doomer capitalism. Like, we all know it's collapsing. So we're just going to try and make as many bucks as we can off of this rotting corpse. And that's, again, just like with the siphoning off the energy with the inspiration porn. This is siphoning off capital, and it's siphoning off you know, our ability to be resilient into these weird cul-de-sacs that are just going to collapse. I mean,
which is arguably what I do for a living. My fund is called Chaotic Capital because I think that we need to start investing in the kinds of systems that thrive on the adaptability that will be required, because nothing will get easier. Chaos is only going to increase, and we have to start investing in systems that increase flexibility. Now, what I think of as systems that increase flexibility is pretty different from what, say, the more traditional venture class thinks of as flexibility. They definitely think of it.
I would love to hear more about. I really want to hear the details of that.
Me too.
Well, so I'll see if I can, like, work my way in with the story.
Okay.
Has anyone watched The Expanse?
Mm-mm.
So The Expanse is a science fiction show about capitalism run amok in the solar system. And there are three types of people who have to live either on Earth or on Mars or out in the belts. And everything is run by corporations. There's not really governments except one that's sort of dysfunctional on Earth. And there's a scene with a botanist who is on a space station that is collapsing. They're going through a collapse. And the botanist is trying to explain nutrient grids to someone. And he says, well, it's a simple, complex system. And because it is complex, we don't know what's going to go wrong yet. And because it is simple, it is prone to cascades. And you put together both the simple and the complex, and well, this system is dead. We just don't know it yet. And I think a lot of the supply chain components of just American capitalism in particular are simple, complex systems. They're complex, so we don't know where it's going to snap, but they are simple, so when they do, it will cascade. And we have seen so much of that just even this year, watching Austin just lose the capacity to function as a city. Whereas like one snowstorm came in and bloop, everyone was miserable. And my general perspective on that is we are going to have lots of simple, complex system issues because that is what we have built, because that's where the money has been traditionally. If you make it complex, you can get more cash in, but if you make it simple, you can extract more. Simplicity is where margin comes from. And I think we have just gotten too used to extracting so much that we don't understand that it's like a tower of Jenga, right? You like pull and pull and pull, and then suddenly, and this is where I am like very much a doomer, where I think, yeah, these collapses are real and they will happen, and it's not going to destroy society. Humans are much more resilient than that, but it can make your life really miserable.
Right. And I'm wondering, like, what is your orientation like toward the optimism side? What ventures or nonprofits or projects do you like to see or are seeing that you want to fund? I would love it if you would also use the mainstream venture capitalists as a foil. What do they think? What do you think? Kind of thing.
Well, there is definitely a strain within venture that does care about collapse. I think everyone kind of has a different orientation towards it. Like the book that I was trying to pull out of my pile, I think Lean Logic is kind of a touchstone for, I think, a lot of people in venture. The title of Lean Logic is A Dictionary for the Future and How to Survive It. And a lot of the basics of it are the systems that are too far from you, you have no control over. And you can feel the temptation to think that they are, but you need to have redundancies, which used to be a pretty common vibe in tech. Everything wasn't in the cloud and run through giant corporate systems. It definitely got started by hobbyists. So much of my introduction to tech as a child was through Whole Earth Catalog, where it was really just a bunch of like happy hippies who were like, cool, we want to go back to the land, and here's some tools that's going to make it more functional for us to achieve those goals. And I just found it so liberating as a kid. So I was like, oh, this is fun. Like, I got a garden, I got my animals. And the power that I felt being able to do some of the basics even early on, I think has translated into how I think about what companies are worth funding and who has the potential to actually both drive venture returns. Because I mean, I'm not altruistic in this, right? Like, I want them to make money, but I think the systems that give you more control and decentralize the systems back into your own life are actually going to be the ones that are exciting. So like a really easy example is a startup that I'm working on right now does tooling for DAOs. And DAOs are decentralized autonomous organizations. And what DAOs want to do is kill the corporation. They think the corporation is a bad structure. And there is no reason to have these large, unwieldy systems that have all of these tax benefits to organize your money and organize your human-centric things, like we want to buy a house together as a group, or we want to build something. And so DAOs theoretically should allow people to put pooled resources, have a smart contract that we agree on ahead of time that says how the resources are allocated. It can be done locally. So if something goes wrong, you don't necessarily need to be like, well, this is going all the way back to, some server, because all of crypto fundamentally needs to be decentralized for these things to work. And like, that's a very far off possibility, right? Killing the corporation is not something that's going to happen in the next 10 or even 20 years. But we have the tools now to come up with different structures for how we organize our resources. And I think that's really important. And that is something that I think could be a many billion-dollar opportunity and also have an impact positively on how humans can organize in ways that offer them more control, offer them more decentralization, and offer them a chance to actually own now I'm going to sound like a Marxist here, own their means of production, which people don't now. And I find that offensive. You should be able to own the things in your life.
Yep, I could not agree more. And I guess to me, the tension that I always deal with is, what role does tech, or basically technology and modern tools, more or less, what role do modern tools play, and where do you draw the line? I'm interested, Julie or Chris, like, where do you draw the line between, like, sort of approaching modern tools skeptically, using them for something? I imagine a lot of people, and just in general, my perspective is, something gets invented and everyone just takes it up wholeheartedly and without question, and then everyone's just sort of not navigating it with skepticism or thinking, what are the unintended consequences of this tool or whatever. So I'm wondering how, like, do you have a perspective or a philosophy or some sort of heuristic as to how you approach this problem, this question, either of you?
Yeah, well, I think for me, I try not to look at any new tool or app or technology as having any kind of moral valence. It is a tool. It is there for me to use. Humans created it. Humans get to assign its worth and value. And I think that can be really tricky, because there's obviously billions of dollars thrown into telling you how you should feel about something. This is a moral good. This is a moral bad. Is it? Have I actually explored that perspective? And I think that we've lost a little bit of that and this is where I think optimism is actually letting us down, that we can be optimistic about the fact that they are our tools. We can control them. We do not have to allow the algorithms to send us on these, dopamine fueled paths where you suddenly get depressed because you let the algorithm of Twitter take you like down some sort of emotional sinkhole. No, you don't have to do that. And I think for me, that means that I will try everything. I'm willing to use everything that comes on the market at least once, just to sort of see, like, do I feel like this improves my humanity? And about half the time, I don't think it does. And then there are other times where I'm pretty positive on it. Like I'm so for the quantified self, because I now have more data about what days I'm going to have a flare in my spine, and I can prepare around that in ways that, just if I didn't know more about my own body, I don't think I would live as full a life. And there's something in crypto that they call Moloch, the god of organization. And I love this concept because it comes down to the idea of communities need to figure out how to organize, because Moloch is always trying to find ways, as like, I don't know, maybe Moloch's like must be a trickster god. I do not know the full etymology of that, but it's the idea that we will pit ourselves against each other and then we cannot organize. But if we look at our tools and see what end opportunities are there for us, and we don't let the tools lead us, it is possible that Moloch cannot win. And we just have so much more control than we think we do.
Chris, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that topic too.
I'm just so naturally skeptical of everything that seems like a great solution. For me personally, I've always gravitated toward the quantified self. I struggle with that concept now because that particular community can be so insular. Just in, again, these seem to be people who might have done well and now have time. And to me, it always comes back to time. Do you have the time and attention? Like, bigger than money. Money goes away. Do we have time and attention? That's the currency. So, yeah, I don't worry too much about, I think, algorithms and all that kind of stuff, because I think it's really important that we stop turning over our autonomy to these systems that we say are controlling us. We wouldn't do this with an abusive spouse. We wouldn't do this with an abusive work, but somehow we do it with computing. Oh, the social dilemma, and it just seems to be such an absolute sadness in me that people talk about how manipulated we are.
Mm.
I don't feel manipulated. I feel empowered.
Mhm.
I don't feel like I'm lost and the computer's telling me what to do. You know, I can use a GPS and still go the wrong way,
Mhm.
you know? And I just wish everybody'd step back from this abyss that, you know, we've lost all a free will, and that, you know, we're just we're careening toward. That's not how doomer optimism, in my opinion, works.
No, and
Doomer optimism would not be like algorithms are running your life, and it would be the opposite of that.
yes,
Mhm.
well, and I think that there is something like, there's this tension that keeps coming up, but the fundamental question here is, do we have agency? Do
Yes.
we as people have agency or not? You know, and it's just one of those things where you start getting into that discussion, then people criticize you and say, oh, you're all about, you know, bootstraps narrative, and you know, imagine all the different ways in which other people struggle, and the limitations on their agency. And I don't want to discount that. I'm a sociologist. It's literally all we talk about are the limitations on people's agency from structures. But at a certain point, those structures are not coming to save you. They're really not coming to save you. There's a point at which you need to accept, and well, this is my orientation. I don't know if you all share it. It seems like you share it, Chris, but there's a point at which you have to accept some measure of self-determination, that to the extent that you can, in any movement you can, any little bit of creativity. And I think of examples of people I've interviewed. There's this community on the south side of Chicago. They took over an abandoned lot that used to be a Sherwin-Williams paint factory that was just sitting empty with, like, you know, needles and broken glass. They cleaned it up. They asked the alderman if they could use it. They brought in old boats that were being thrown out from this nearby harbor, filled those with soil. A part of the city of Chicago takes people's Christmas trees and mulches them after Christmas, and they just dump that in some industrial facility, and you can request it. So they requested all this mulch. They inoculated that with mushrooms to sort of pull out any heavy metals. Like, the amount that you can really do despite challenges is unbelievable. And I think if my message is anything to anyone, it's just to empower them and to get them to see, like, what's possible when you start to be creative, and to think of these things as tools, or to think of these structures as things you are able to navigate to some extent. Like, I really want to empower people without making them feel guilty, like, you know, that you should be doing more or something like that.
I also want to chime in a little bit about, I do struggle with the whole concept of privilege. You know, I've never been privilege checked. Trust me. I mean, I'm waiting for the day someone's like, oh, Chris, it's very nice of you with all of your expensive gadgets and quantification of privilege check me. My healthcare. I'm waiting for. I'm so paranoid about that day because I know it's coming. But that being said, I grew up super conservative. I'm a 50-year-old gay guy who, like, grew up listening to Dr. Laura Schlesinger and Rush Limbaugh in the 90s, like things that now would be considered racist and hateful. And I don't like bootstraps unless they're attached like a hell of a heel, right? But like at the end of the day, like, as cliche as it sounds, books like Man's Search for Meaning, and I don't even know if this is politically okay to talk about anymore, like, that really meant a lot to me, you know, seeing someone, how their attitude kind of changed where they were. And I just find it so sad when I look at some of this community today, and people just, you know, well, we really can't do anything. And I'm like, well, are you trying to get attention? Or are you trying to get change? Because if you want to get attention, okay, you're right, you're not very effective. If you're trying to get change, have you helped anyone personally today? Like, you talk to the cashier, that's a good start. These cashiers are damn lonely.
Mhm.
There's this problem very strongly in people who think they want to run startups, where I'll get pitched by kids who will say, I have this idea and it's really great and cool, and if you just give me the money, I can do it. And then I have to go back to them and say, okay, well, what can you do before, how far can you get it? What is your agency over your idea? And I'll have to explain that, yes, I do need to see something, just anything, just build anything. Show me that you have the capability to see something in your mind and make it appear in your hand. It isn't magic, it is just understanding that you can build more than you think you can, and stop waiting for someone to write you a big check. I will write you a check once you show me that the check just gets you farther. You were already building in the first place.
Mhm.
I love what you're saying, Julie. I'm a big advocate for something called no code, low code, tools like Airtable, et cetera. And I actually helped build something for Ashley recently on Airtable. And again, if you can't spend an hour to build something on Airtable that solves a problem, you don't deserve anybody's podcast dollar or attention. It's literally a spreadsheet that could save your neighborhood in a disaster. And you can't take the time to do that.
Mhm.
And it's
No.
not, people really don't want to hear that. I see a lot of anger and resentment, and this is actually where the privilege discussion does come up, where it's like, well, how dare you? You should give me a chance because I want to do it. Like, yes, and I want you to do it too, which is why I'm asking you to take the very first baby steps to show that you can build something. It can be shitty, it can be janky, it cannot work, but you have to try. I am perfectly happy to see 9 failures before you get to the 10th one, and the 10th one is just only barely functional. That's good enough.
I love that. This podcast is a perfect example of it, is that we're just sort of like, listen, I mean, me and Ashley and Jason did have some discussion about like how we were going to do this. And then we finally just sort of landed on, well, what is the easiest way to, like, how can we actually just do it? Even if it's an ugly Zoom call and the audio quality is terrible and I don't know how to make a podcast, like I don't know how to actually assemble it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, because what our goal actually is to create a community around ideas. And that doesn't require flashy microphones or good visuals, or it doesn't require any of that. It actually just requires individuals sitting down in some capacity. And once we kind of like whittled it down to that, it was like, oh, the pathway's super clear. Like let's just record Zoom calls. I'm using Anchor FM, right? Which like is like, it's like podcasts for really dumb dummies, like it's so simple. And we put it out there, and hopefully it'll get better as we go along and we'll be able to expand it. But this is the kernel of what we wanted to see.
Right. And I would just add, like, I think that orientation in general, when I say to people, like, you have agency, I'm probably going to say this every single podcast now because it just always is my message, but like, just try anything that's meaningful and interesting to you. Just move toward anything and start building any real thing, whatever it is. If it, for here it's a podcast. We also have chickens and cows. Like, my family, I'm trying alternative education models with them. Just move toward things. You don't have to have it all figured out. And in fact, you should not, because I think there is also something in this agency structure privilege conversation that is people have like a brain worm that's utopian. The utopian brain worm is, I can't move toward anything until the system is perfectly set up for me to move toward. And it reminds me of what you're saying, Julie, like, all I need is this cash and all my problems will be solved. All I need is this kit and all my problems will be solved. It's like one of those things where people kind of think, well, I just need a one-stop shop solution, and it'll be good. It reminds me of something Josh Helling, our last guest, said to me in a personal conversation. I'm trying to build a homesteading class for people who are interested in getting onto some land and do some sort of homesteading. I am building this class. I'm going to run it in January. And I was asking his advice about it. And he said, you can't give people pigs in a kit. You have to give them the heuristics for how to manage pigs in their own land with their own goals in mind. Is it for sale? Is it for self-consumption? How does it interact with all the different specificity of their own land? All of that is work, but the only way to figure it out is to go through. You can't get pigs in a kit. And I think, like, in general, I think that's a really good heuristic. It's for me, the optimism, the doomer optimism thing, it's like the only way out is through. It's a skill set. It's an orientation. It's a philosophy toward trying things and failing and then learning, sort of thing. On that note, I'm wondering, Julie, if you have, well, I want to hear more about the Luddite side of you. I know you have some permaculture books. I'm wondering which part of the prepper or doomer or collapse preparation you're doing is non-tech.
Well, most of it has to be non-tech, just by dint of, I am someone that believes that climate change is very much happening, is an existential threat. And because our systems are not particularly resilient, I expect there will be a time, and I don't know how long those times will be, maybe it's a couple days, maybe it's weeks, in which I am going to need to support myself and my neighbors. I live in a little complex where we organize together, because no one can do it alone. And so I, because of that, like to think a lot about how I can make small steps towards making my food closer to home. So I'm a member of a CSA. I own a portion of a dairy that does raw milk. And just those little things, because I don't have the homestead yet. It's something that I want to work towards. And one of the reasons I find all this kind of appealing is, one, everything just tastes better. So why wouldn't I? Because now I have that option. But part of it is I went through a systems schooling called Waldorf schools. And Waldorf schools are head, heart, and hands. And so much of the way they think about learning is very experiential. And so botany classes are taught on the farm. Anatomy is taught in the animal husbandry sort of aspect of the farm. And I have just found so much joy in being able to learn more about the world around me by just saying, okay, well, how do you make yogurt? Oh, that was easy. This is fun. So I think for me, the regenerative agriculture and biodynamic farming have been really interesting. And I'm really proud to support the local farms that I'm near. Not everyone has that opportunity, but I think anyone can start. You can set up a hydroponic system and grow lettuce, like if you live in an apartment. Well, that's actually what I did in New York. We just got a system, got some lamps, and it worked. It was great. And I think that if you want to start small, getting to know the basics of your food chain just for fun can actually be like one of the more rewarding aspects of it. So I am trying to learn more of it. I've got this stack of things on like country living and escape the city, because it has been years since I've actually had to do any of these things. I did as a kid, and I've been a city slicker for a while.
Yeah, my larger term vision is to try to connect people with the class and via various methods to via this podcast, whatever it is. I want everybody to find one another, other people who are on this similar journey, and just kind of be resources for one another. My not so secret ulterior motive is to build this network of people who are like you and other people who are like, all right, I'm sure that I should know more about this. You're also on this journey. Let's do this together and help each other. I also think there's something really key in what you said about like learning about your food chain. I would say in comparison to the 3-day survive for 3-day kit, there's something really different philosophically between survive for 3 days and be able to do something that like will sustain you indefinitely. And I think there's something really important there. I've talked about this a little bit on Twitter, like the difference between consumer and producer. Yeah. The consumer is just, feed me and clothe me, and I just can buy my way out of this. And the producer is even if the producer is buying from a local farmer or something like that, or even if buying from a local farmer, you build a relationship that relationship is in my opinion, more co-production than just buying a prepping kit. You know where your food comes from, you're building a relationship there, you're supporting that, and that's an indefinite way to sustain yourself. And I think like a lot of people get that wrong. They think like I can either buy a kit or I can survive for 3 days, whatever it is, and you know, pig in a kit. And yeah, I think there's something philosophical there. Chris or Trace, did you have anything else to add? I have another question.
I wanted to kind of, I think that, my viewpoint is how can we flip that question of like, how can I survive for 3 days? How can I actually save my neighbor for 3 days? And, there's, so like, like grackles, and other like kind of murmuration birds, right? They've kind of, in studying them, they've determined that how they actually manage that is every bird is really only focused on the birds immediately next to them, right? And so I think that one of the issues with Twitter and social media and just the kind of the way that technology has been built is that we're so focused on the whole problem, right? That we don't realize that Julie, you said something very similar to this, that the further the problem is away from you, or the further it is away from you, the less control you have over that. So like my heuristic online is like, as soon as my Twitter sphere starts talking about COVID, Washington, DC, like any kind of national or international meme, I just shut it off. I'm like, I'm not going to talk about it. I'm not even going to give it my attention because I have zero control over Joe Biden. None, no control, one iota. What I do have control over is my own backyard, my neighborhood, my community. That's it, right? And so I think that like, we think this is a very individualist society here. So we think of how we can save ourselves, but in fact, a better solution is how can I save my neighbor? And then if another neighbor's saying, how can I save Trace's family, right? And we're all just sort of like interconnected just by 1 degree. We don't have to save our whole community. I just have to help the neighbor next door. So I've kind of like been trying to put out like, can you be the blueberry pie person in June, right? And that's just like literally all you do. You just plant a bunch of blueberries and you make blueberry pies in June and give them to your neighbors, right? And then your neighbor is like the sweet potato pie person. And then you get sweet potato pies in October, right? Or November. And like everyone just does their one thing. And if every neighbor did their one thing, right, we'd all have enough. It's just like a potluck, right? Which is the perfect example of abundance, right? Everyone does a little thing. What's that?
Everyone should have a potluck with your immediate neighbors. Yep. And let them know, hey, if anything happens, winter's coming, like, what's your plan? That's like, that's how I start to doom pill people, or be like, yeah, come on over, we'll like eat and talk about the fact that, we're in Colorado and there's winter here.
Yeah.
Could you allow me to share my screen for a moment? I think you have to enable that.
Yep, hold on, that's something let me do that.
One of the things, I live next to a man, his name is Russell Shelton. He's Russell's probably in his mid-60s, diabetic, has a lot of challenges. But a few months ago, I went over to see him and he got very emotional. And he said, Chris, I have to tell you something. And I said, wow, he's not an emotional man. He's a proud Texan. I live in Texas. And he said, I've never had a neighbor in my entire life. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, I've never had someone who came to check on me. And I'm going to get emotional now just because I really changed my whole view of this. And when COVID hit, there was a big problem because my neighborhood's full of a lot of older folks. And I didn't know what was going to happen. Was it food supply kind of collapse? Who had what? So the first thing I did, and I just want to share this with you guys real quick, was I built this thing on Airtable. And I think, Julie, you'll maybe appreciate this. And it was just a really simple system that had a very simple web front end where you could search for, are you having some type of disaster beyond even pandemic? I put them all in here. And who can help you in the neighborhood and what type of information were you looking for? If you were in the neighborhood and you were having a challenge, you could literally just put in a little ticket right here, and then that would roll up here. And then if you had a skill or equipment, are you a caregiver? Do you know how to plant? Do you know how to do this? Or do you have some piece of equipment? Could you volunteer it? And within 2 weeks of me rolling this out in the neighborhood, it just transformed everybody, not only in the street, in our neighborhood. And they started saying, okay, we don't have to depend on the local systems and all these other type of stuff. And I think it's so important when I was just listening to you talk now about the birds. Even if it's just on Twitter or a bird, or start right next to you.
Mhm.
It does not take a lot. And I'm going to go back to say something I said earlier. Just thanking the people at the store is an amazing step. They are lonely. I don't know what parts of the world you guys are in. I know Julie and Ashley, I don't know if you've left yet, but no one talks to anyone anymore.
Mhm.
There is so much healing that could be done, I think, if we just did this. And last but not least, I would love to get into regenerative farming. I'll be honest with you guys. I'm just getting down the last 2 years with cooking my own meals. Like that was a big deal for me to learn how to cook. And then the other thing was learning about weather. You know, it's gonna sound dumb, but I didn't even understand like the basics of rain or humidity or dew points or ultraviolet, or I didn't understand any of that. So I have aspirations to being an Ashley one day, or you know, to like getting to know my local farmers like Julie. But again, if you're a simple cyborg like me, like learn about weather. Like there's a great place to start. Like I can't tell you how much I did not understand about just, you know, the atmosphere.
I think there's one last thing I'd kind of like to bring up is that it's kind of getting back to what you were talking about, Julie, about how, you know, just everyone has agency, the ability to like do something small, just kind of get the ball rolling. I do think that I personally believe that the system, especially the larger scale systems, are actually just waiting for the right tip. Like they're not as strong as they say they are. And they're really definitely in the you know, like when a sun right before it explodes or collapses, it gets really big and puffs up and look at me, you know. And I think we're in that stage. Is that like you know, I mean, I look at Washington DC's response to COVID, right? Is like there's no way at all they could possibly enact a vaccine mandate across the country and actually do it in all the rural counties and all the little places. They would need a massive apparatus of like centralized law enforcement to make that happen. They can't do it. So what he did was he went to the only centralized places they have, which are large corporations, right?
Yeah.
And they're going to try and enforce it with small businesses, but who? Are the police going to do it? No, because half the police are quitting their jobs because they won't get the vaccine, right? There's literally no enforcement capability. Or dying. But like there's no enforcement capability. And I think that a lot of people will not take action because they assume that it will bring hellfire down upon them. When in actuality, there's lots of vacant space you could just take over and literally no one's going to stop you. There's no authority to stop you. And even if they do, just go to the next vacant lot and do it again, right?
Yep.
They can't, we're at the point where we can play whack-a-mole with the authorities and they can't stop us. They actually can't stop us.
Trace the anarchist.
Yeah. Well, it's not anarchy. It's about creating it's about creating alternative centralized systems, right? So the reason why the Roman Empire's collapse was a lot less bad than it could have been is because there were all these other centralized small scale systems that just took the brunt of it, right? In many communities, like especially in Britain, right? They just seamlessly went from Roman rule to like Catholic Church rule, like and local, you know, local fiefdom rule, like and for the average person, there was literally no difference. It was just a seamless transition from one authority to the next. No, their lifetime didn't go down, their caloric intake didn't go down. Life was just the same as it was under Roman, you know, same shit, different day. And I think that we're in a very similar situation in that respect. You know, Hannah Arendt in Nonviolence is very clear that like the more violent a system is, the less actual power it has. So the only way our system at the state and at the federal level can actually enact any policies, centralized policies, is through pure, unadulterated violence, right? And Occupy proved that. The Battle of Seattle proved that. COVID has proved it. BLM has proved it over and over and over again. Anytime they try and fight back, they have to just like, they have to beat your head in. That's the only way they can get you to comply. And they can't beat everyone's head in. They just simply can't. So especially they're not going to beat your head in for building a little community garden on a vacant lot, right? They may just come and tear it up, right? Which is bad PR for them, for one thing. But then you just go to the next vacant lot and do it again, right? I mean, it's like no one's going to stop you from planting blueberry bushes on the side of the road. They might tear it up, right? but what's a blueberry bush? If you go by seed, it's like $1.50, and you can plant 50 blueberry bushes, and no one's going to stop you, right?
Well, what's crazy is nobody stops you for shooting and killing someone in road rage. You know, we still
or
are
running
sitting here
people
talking
over,
about
running over
right.
6 people
I mean,
bicycling.
I think it's so important that we just tell people, especially people who feel not empowered, like now is that time. Literally, go find that spot, go find that thing to disturb, and just do it. Like literally, no one is going to yell at you, and you could even do it in secret, right? Like be a secret anarchist and try stuff out. I don't think it's ever been more safe to be non-violent in a disruptive way.
And to and to do experimentation. And on that topic, I wanted to ask both Chris and Julie. I'll start with Julie. Like, what advice would you give someone? I'll start by saying with this podcast, we talked a lot about, we don't want to be like every other podcast, just talking about ideas and theory. We want to talk about giving people specific actionable next steps, like even if it's a psychological actionable next step. So I'm wondering, like, what advice would you give to people who are sort of like mired in doomerism, don't know, where to turn? What first steps would you suggest for people? And then I want Chris to answer that too.
Well, I think to Trey's point, you can just start doing stuff and nothing bad is going to happen. I know a guy named Zach Klein who lives in San Francisco. And San Francisco, you think of as being just a scoosh authoritarian in their city government, just a little. And he literally pulled up the pavement and the sidewalks around his house and planted trees. And it turns out there was no code for it. Nobody thought like, oh no, this is illegal, because he just wanted more trees. And so he's encouraging people to say, hey, if your square block doesn't have tree cover, we will, I don't remember the name of his organization, so I guess Google Zach Klein and you'll find it. They will come give you a tree and you just rip up that concrete, put in a tree. No one's going to stop you. And shade is really great when the power goes out and it's hot. So it doesn't have to be that extreme, even though I don't think planting a tree is particularly extreme. I think that you have to commit to do one small thing every day. And I always recommend people start with water, because that seems like the least scary thing. And Austin was a good example of this, where you had to boil your water because water treatment wasn't working. So do you have enough water for 3 days? If the answer is no, well, go to Costco, buy some water bricks, fill up some water, or figure out where your local creek is and how you get water back and forth. I think it's just so much easier to do the little things. And then if something bad happens and you're the only one who bothered to prepare to have water, your entire neighborhood is going to survive because you were the one person that did it ahead of time. It doesn't have to be complex. You can really start at the bottom.
And Chris, what would you say? I know you've contributed what it is that you're interested in and focused on. And to me, like, that's the same thing with me. Like, I'm really interested in ag stuff. I just really enjoy farms, and people who live on farms, I think is lovely. So I like to lift them up. I really like alternative education systems, especially because I have little kids. Like, I move toward the things that I'm interested in, do my little part to explore them, experiment with them, and share that back. So I'm wondering, what advice would you give people based on your little explorations and experimentation?
It's gonna sound crazy. Every show I've ever done, podcast, interview, etc., I always end it the same way. My phone number is literally on my website, the one that rings right here. So I always tell people, if there's any tip I'd give you is reach out. Right? You're having a bad day, you're sad, you're excited, you think you've solved world hunger, reach out. We cannot practice talking to each other enough. We cannot expose ourselves to the terror of picking up the phone and speaking to a stranger often enough. We cannot embrace and find each other fast enough. All the technology won't save anyone if we're afraid to look in their eyes.
That's what it comes down to for me. That's such a beautiful statement of it. To me, it's my dissertation, which I published as a book, the subtitle is Reconnecting to Work, Nature, and Community.
Yeah.
It's really about connection fundamentally. And Josh said this to our last interviewee. It's about connection. It's about connection to a place, to people, to non-human creatures. And it's about meaning. I think fundamentally it's so much of the doomerism is about disconnection, and a lot of the optimism for me is about rekindling connection wherever and whichever sphere.
What good is your homestead if you don't know the people in the homesteads next to you? I just think, again, when we live in this disconnection culture, we fetishize unplugging. We fetishize, it's just overwhelming to me. Ashley, you muted yourself.
Sorry, I was talking to my dad.
Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to tell you. Have Dad come in.
Yeah. So, okay, no, he just walked away. Okay, so I'm gonna stick with our tradition of having our guest Julie have the last word. So Julie, you can take it away.
My favorite movie is Contact. And in Contact, the end of this radio astronomer's journey to try to talk to other life forms in the universe is none of this. The only thing that makes any of it worth it is each other. So Chris is right. If you are not reaching out to someone, if you are not reaching out to someone that is your other people in your life, I don't care how well prepared you are. The only thing that matters is each other.
That's great. I think we should just